When I was but a fetus, my mother was injected with a mycene antibiotic that would wreak secret havoc on my fetal nervous system. It wasn't until the year I turned 10 that doctors discovered I was not quite blind as a bat, but definitely deaf as a doornail. It was that summer, my first as a disabled child, that I won the award for Best Swimmer at the Texas Lions Camp for Crippled Children. I can't help but think that I won Best Swimmer not because of my skill at the Australian crawl, but because I got the almost drowned sympathy vote. Although if you want to know the truth, what I really deserved to win was Best Actress for my performance of drowning. At the Lions Camp, I was one of the few children who are allowed to swim and compete at the deep end of the pool. My two racing competitors were the blind girl and the one-legged girl. Most afternoons, I usually beat them in our races because the blind girl, sometimes flummoxed by the clueless texture of the water, often bunked her head against the side of the pool, while the one-legged had trouble calibrating the necessary ballast to do anything but paddle around in circles. But this particular afternoon, my day had been a long one. I was homesick and lonely, and at breakfast, my friend and love Dolores and I had had a tiff because I didn't think she was paying me enough attention. And then at crafts, before lunch, I deliberately shattered the clay ashtray I'd made for my mother because to my critical eye, it didn't look enough like a rattlesnake coiling. In the canteen at noon, I'd sat munching my PB&J, brooding over fickle love and artistic failure, bitterly berating myself for even being in this sorry excuse for camp. Camp was supposed to be the place where I'd finally come into my own, shed this fleshy misinterpretation of my soul, and gradually be transformed back into the conquering good looker I knew I was meant to be, and it wasn't happening. It was only after I changed into my swimsuit, jumped into the pool, and started practicing the crawl that my gloom began to lift. Just being around the deep-end instructor made me feel tingly with hope. And by the time we'd finished our lesson and we were ready to race, I was just about in love with life again. And then, ready, set, poof! There I was once more. My own tubby, little ill-favored self in a messy competition with two other cripples who were going to beat me in a pathetic water race for a plastic two-handled cup. I wanted to stop the action, demand that we start over again, because I hadn't heard the right words. I'd been fouled by my deafness, and that's why I wasn't going to win, and it just wasn't fair. Oh, I knew how my competitors would react to that, the same way I would have, with scorn. Blind girl wouldn't bother, maybe didn't even know how to hide her visible contempt. And one leg would swirl her stump around in the water and flick a look over at the shallow end of the pool, a reminder, like her stump, that far greater, far more visible tragedies than mine existed. I knew that no matter what excuse I offered up for losing, there'd be no excuse, not even to my own mind, really. Even when I wore the glasses and the hearing aids that made my own flaws visible, I knew that among those other disabled kids at camp, I could never be handicapped enough, which made it all the more humiliating that my own modest disabilities had tripped me up, made a fool of me, a loser. I thought to losers. All my life, I'd felt as if there were an eye on me. Not necessarily a hostile eye, but a feared one, like an eye of God, an eye of the world. as if the very substance of the air were judging whether I were fit to live. I was simply feeling all that as a shame, a whirling loss of heart that was threatening to overwhelm me. So I took the only action I could think against that sea of trouble. I drowned. Forcing yourself to drown, willing yourself to sink, isn't as easy a thing to do as you might imagine, but I did it. I sank a little, dropped an inch or so under the water, and until my natural buoyancy bobbed me right back up. The deep end instructor saw me go under. I could feel her eyes on me the minute I decided to let go. And as I slipped under the surface a second time, I felt a thrill of real panic because I knew with that little double dip, my bit of fakery had just gotten out of hand. But it was a first-rate, compelling enactment, if I do say so myself. To my own feelings of despair that were threatening to overwhelm me there in the water, I knew how to give up, give in, be perfectly drawn down. As I slipped under the water for a third time, I gulped in great gouts of liquid. So when I bobbled up again, I was choking and spewing, as if the pathetic victim I was making of myself had tragically mistaken the killing element of water for the saving grace of air. I was so perfectly convincing that my audience was taken in. Blind girl, one leg, shallow enders all, the actions of their lives were brought to a halt. It was then that the deep end instructor unwittingly joined me in my act, diving in to play out her own role of savior. She cut through the churning water, reached down to lift my head up to the blue sky, and then, with perfect strokes, exactly as she had rehearsed every day of her lifeguard training, she pulled me away from the beckoning depths and hauled my ass out of the water. On the hot concrete where she laid me, we made an elegant duo. She pushed my chest, and I let the watery froth come rolling out of my mouth, as if it had been lodged in my lungs rather than merely held in the back of my throat. And when finally I thought the timing right, I gag-spluttered, opened my eyes, and looking into that perfectly mimicked gaze of someone who had eyeballed death by water. She pulled me to her as I shivered and wept and held me tight against the wet, panting, perfect body that I loved.